The harsh Texas sun beat down on the smoldering remains of what was once a modest frontier cabin. Among the charred timbers and ash lay the crumpled form of a young woman, her breathing shallow, her face streaked with soot and blood. The outlaws, who'd left her for dead, had made 3 fatal mistakes. They hadn't finished the job, they hadn't covered their tracks, and they hadn't known that Emily Blackwood was the daughter of James Thunderwolf Blackwood, respected U.S. Marshal by day and proud Comanche chief by heritage. As consciousness slowly returned to Emily's battered body, so too did a primal instinct that had lain dormant in her blood for years, the warrior spirit of her father's people. The men who destroyed her home would soon learn that some fires can never be extinguished, only transformed into something far more dangerous. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Spring had arrived early that year in the Texas hill country, painting the rugged landscape with blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush. For Emily Blackwood, the changing of seasons brought a sense of renewal and hope. At 24, she had finally established herself on the small parcel of land left to her by her late mother, Sarah. The cabin she had built with her own hands stood as a testament to her fierce independence, a trait inherited from both her American mother and her father, James Blackwood. Few in these parts knew the full truth about James. To most, he was simply a respected U.S. Marshal with a reputation for tracking outlaws that bordered on supernatural. Only Emily and a trusted few knew that James had been born White Eagle, son of a powerful Comanche chief, adopted as a young boy by the Blackwood family after a peace treaty between his tribe and the settlers. James had walked in both worlds, earning respect in each, though never fully belonging to either. Emily had inherited her father's olive complexion and raven black hair, though her eyes were her mother's, a piercing blue that seemed to shift like the sky before a storm. She'd been raised with knowledge of both her heritages, though as tensions between settlers and natives grew, she had learned to keep her Comanche blood a closely guarded secret. That morning, like every morning, Emily rose before dawn to tend to her small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden that supplied most of her needs. Her nearest neighbor, old Mr. Peterson, lived 5 miles to the east, and the growing town of Willow Creek lay 15 miles to the south. Emily valued her solitude, finding peace in the rhythm of her daily chores and the vast open spaces surrounding her homestead. As she drew water from the well, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something felt wrong. The birds had gone silent, and her mare, Penny, shifted nervously in her corral. Emily set down her bucket and reached for the Winchester rifle she kept propped against the well. She'd learned long ago that survival on the frontier required constant vigilance. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm armed, and I know how to use this." For a moment, silence was her only answer. Then a deep, gravelly voice responded, from the edge of the tree line. "Well, now, that's mighty impressive for a little lady all alone." A man emerged from the shadows, his clothes dusty from the trail, and his face partially obscured by a week's worth of beard. What she could see of his features was hard and weathered, with cold eyes that reminded Emily of a rattlesnake's unblinking stare. "State your business and be on your way," Emily said, her finger resting lightly on the rifle's trigger. "This is private property." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Private property, is it? That's actually what brings us here today." As he spoke, 2 more riders emerged from the trees, flanking him. Both were armed, with revolvers holstered at their hips and Winchester rifles in their saddle scabbards. "Names?" "Jackson Cole," the first man said, taking a step forward. "These are my associates, the Daniels brothers, and we represent certain investments in this territory." Emily had heard whispers about Jackson Cole in town, a hired gun working for Wealthy cattle barons looking to expand their empires by whatever means necessary. Smaller ranchers and homesteaders had been driven out across 3 counties, their land mysteriously changing hands after fires, accidents, or in some cases, outright violence. "I have a legal claim to this land," Emily said, standing her ground. "Signed and registered in Willow Creek. You got no business here." Cole's smile didn't reach his eyes. Funny thing about paper, burns real easy. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Her father had taught her that showing fear to predators only emboldened them. "My father is U.S. Marshal James Blackwood," she said, hoping the name would give them pause. "He'll be visiting any day now." At this, the taller of the Daniels brothers spat on the ground. "Blackwood won't be a problem for much longer. Word is, he's been poking his nose where it don't belong. Besides, he's all the way up in Fort Worth chasing some gang. By the time he hears about this, it'll all be settled business." The cold certainty in his voice made Emily's blood run cold. These men knew her father's whereabouts with disturbing accuracy. "Now," Cole continued, "we're reasonable men. We've been authorized to offer you $50 for this property, more than fair for land this far from town." "This land isn't for sale," Emily replied, her grip tightening on her rifle. "Not for $50, not for $500, Cole sighed dramatically. "Miss Blackwood, I don't think you understand your position here. This isn't a negotiation. Either you take the money and leave with your dignity intact, or—" He let the threat hang in the air. Emily leveled her rifle at Cole's chest. "I believe. I've made myself clear. Get off my land." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Cole raised his hands in a placating gesture. All right. No need for things to get ugly. We'll be on our way. But do think about our offer. We'll be back tomorrow for your answer." Emily kept her rifle trained on them as they mounted their horses and rode slowly back into the trees. Only when they were out of sight did she lower her weapon, her hands trembling slightly. She had no illusions about what had just happened. This was no honest business proposition. Quickly, she gathered what supplies she could carry and saddled Penny. She needed to ride to town to telegraph her father and warn the sheriff. Something in Cole's eyes told her they wouldn't wait until tomorrow. She had just finished securing her saddlebags when she heard the riders returning. Not 3 this time, but at least 6 or 7, judging by the thundering hoofbeats. Emily swung into Penny's saddle, urging the mare toward the tree line on the opposite side of her property, hoping to use the dense forest as cover. She hadn't made it halfway across the clearing when the first shot rang out. The bullet whistled past her ear, close enough that she felt its passage like a hot breath on her skin. Penny whinnied in terror and reared, nearly unseating Emily. "There she goes!" one of the men shouted. "Don't let her reach the trees!" Emily leaned low over Penny's neck, urging the terrified horse forward. Another shot rang out, and she felt a searing pain across her upper arm. The bullet had grazed her, tearing through cloth and skin. She reached the edge of the forest, guiding Penny through the dense underbrush. Behind her, she could hear the men cursing as they struggled to follow, on their larger horses. For a moment, Emily thought she might outrun them, but then Penny stumbled on a hidden root, throwing Emily forward over her neck. Emily hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Dazed, she tried to rise, but her right ankle gave way beneath her. Penny had recovered her footing and stood nearby, trembling with fear. "Go on," Emily whispered, giving the mare a sharp slap on the flank. Penny bolted deeper into the forest, leaving Emily alone with her pursuers closing in. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Emily dragged herself behind a fallen log, drawing her father's revolver from her belt. If they wanted her land, they'd have to pay for it in blood. The first rider crashed through the underbrush, and Emily took aim. She squeezed the trigger, and the man cried out, clutching his shoulder before. Tumbling from his saddle, "She's behind that log," he shouted. "The bitch shot me!" Bullets splintered the wood around her as Emily fired again, forcing her attackers to take cover. She counted her shots, 4 left in the revolver, and no time to reload. "You're just making this harder on yourself, girl," Cole called out. "We could have done this clean." Emily didn't waste breath responding. Instead, she fired again when one of the Daniels brothers exposed himself, her bullet catching him in the thigh. But the odds were impossible. As Emily prepared to make her final stand, a searing pain exploded at the back of her head. One of Cole's men had circled around behind her position and struck her with his rifle butt. The world swam before her eyes as rough hands dragged her to her feet. Through the haze of pain, she saw Cole approach, his expression a mixture of annoyance and cruel amusement. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," he said, backhanding her across the face. "But spirit don't count for much out here." They bound her wrists and forced her to watch as they ransacked her cabin, taking anything of value before dousing the walls with lamp oil. Cole himself struck the match, tossing it onto the oil-soaked porch with a casual flick of his wrist. Emily struggled against her bonds as flames consumed her home. Everything she had built, every memory of her mother stored in precious keepsakes, all of it fed the hungry fire. "Now for you," Cole said, turning to her with dead eyes. "Can't have any witnesses telling tales, can we?" The first blow came from behind, a rifle stock between her shoulder blades that drove her to her knees. Then came boots and fists, a rain of punishment that seemed endless. Emily fought at first, but soon could only curl into herself, trying to protect her vital organs as her father had once taught her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Through swollen eyes, she saw Cole draw his knife. "Nothing personal," he said, crouching beside her. "Just business." The blade plunged into her side, between her ribs. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, white-hot and all-consuming. Emily gasped, tasting blood in her mouth as Cole twisted the knife before yanking it free. "Let's go," he ordered his men. "She won't last the hour. Make sure you grab those land deeds from what's left of the cabin once the fire dies down." Emily lay in the dirt, listening to the receding hoofbeats as consciousness began to slip away from her. The pain in her side had become strangely distant, replaced by a spreading coldness. Above her, smoke from her burning home blackened the clear spring sky. As darkness closed in, Emily's thoughts turned to her father. James Blackwood had survived worse than this, she knew. Among the Comanche, he had been subjected to rituals that tested the limits of human endurance. He had taught her some of those ways, how to enter the spirit world and return, how to find strength when the body had none left to give. "Not today," she whispered through bloodied lips. "I will not die today." With monumental effort, Emily pressed her hand against the knife wound, stemming the flow of blood. Her father's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, ancient words in the Comanche tongue, guiding her toward survival rather than surrender. Hours passed as Emily drifted between consciousness and delirious dreams. The fire had consumed her cabin entirely, leaving only smoking ruins. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that seemed to reach into her very soul. Sometime during the darkest hours, Emily became aware of a presence nearby. Through blurred vision, she made out the shape of a wolf standing at the edge of the clearing, its amber eyes reflecting the dying embers of her home. In her delirium, Emily wondered if the wolf had come to claim her spirit. But the animal simply watched, neither approaching nor retreating. As Emily stared back, a strange calm washed over her. She remembered her father's teachings about the wolf spirit, a guide between worlds, a symbol of loyalty and survival, against impossible odds. "I understand," she murmured, though whether to the wolf or herself she couldn't say. When dawn broke, the wolf was gone. In its place stood Emily Blackwood, Battered, bleeding, but alive, the night had transformed her, burning away the last vestiges of the settler's daughter and leaving behind something new, something forged in fire and pain. She tore strips from her tattered clothing, binding her wounds as best she could. The knife had missed her vital organs. A miracle, or perhaps something else. Her Comanche ancestors, her father would have said, watching over their own. From the ashes of her cabin, Emily salvaged what little remained. A charred hunting knife, a canteen that had somehow survived the blaze, and most precious of all, her father's old compass, its case blackened but the mechanism still functioning. As she gathered these meager supplies, her eyes fell upon tracks in the soft earth. Cole and his men, heading south toward Willow Creek, they had taken everything from her, believing they had taken her life as well. Their confidence would be their undoing. Emily straightened, ignoring the screaming protest of her injuries. She was no longer just James Blackwood's daughter. She was White Eagle's granddaughter, with warrior blood flowing through her veins, and she had made a decision that would alter the course of many lives, including her own. Cole and his men had left her for dead, never imagining that their actions had awakened something ancient and unforgiving within her. They didn't know that her father, in addition to being a U.S. Marshal, was a Comanche chief's son, who had passed down to his daughter not just his blue-black hair and steady hands, but also the sacred knowledge of his people, knowledge that included the art of vengeance. Emily looked one last time at the smoking ruins of her home before turning her face toward the horizon. The men who had done this would pay, not just for her suffering, but for every homesteader they had terrorized, every life they had destroyed in their greed. First, she would heal. Then, she would hunt. And like her Comanche ancestors, Emily Blackwood would not stop until justice had been served in blood. The journey to Broken Rock Canyon nearly claimed Emily's life twice over. 3 days after the attack, fever set in as infection took hold of her knife wound. Stumbling through the wilderness, she fought the delirium that threatened to send her wandering in circles until exposure finished what Cole's blade had started. The 4th day, she collapsed at the base of a towering limestone cliff face, certain her journey had ended. Through blurred vision, she saw a figure approaching, tall and copper-skinned, bow slung across his back. For a moment, Emily thought she had crossed over, that her grandfather White Eagle had come to guide her spirit home. "Father," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The figure knelt beside her, weathered hands gentle as they assessed her wounds. "Not your father, niece. I am Matthew Running Elk, brother to White Eagle in spirit, if not in blood." Matthew Running Elk had been her father's closest friend among the Comanche, a medicine man who had chosen a life of solitude after the last of the treaties had forced most of his people onto reservations. Few knew of his sanctuary hidden within Broken Rock Canyon, a place where the old ways were preserved and practiced away from prying eyes. Jackson Cole, Emily managed before consciousness slipped away, burned everything. When she awoke, Emily lay on a bed of soft furs within a traditional teepee. Her wounds had been cleaned and dressed with poultices that smelled of sage and cedar. Matthew sat nearby, singing softly in the Comanche tongue, healing songs that seemed to sink into her bones, easing pain and drawing out poison. "You hover between worlds," he told her when he noticed her watching him. "Your white mother's strength flows in you, but it is White Eagle's blood that will save you now." For 2 weeks, Emily drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. In her lucid moments, Matthew fed her broth strong with healing herbs and told her stories of her father's youth, tales of James Blackwood before he became a lawman, when he was simply White Eagle's son, excelling in the warrior's path. "Your father walked away from our ways," Matthew said one evening as Emily sat up for the first time, but he never forgot them. He feared you would face hatred if you embraced your Comanche blood too openly. Emily touched the bandage at her side, the pain now a dull throb rather than the searing agony of before. He taught me some things, enough to survive. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. To survive, yes. But now you need more than survival. His dark eyes studied her face. You seek vengeance. It wasn't a question. Emily met his gaze steadily. Justice, she corrected. Cole and his men must answer for what they've done, not just to me, but to others before me. Justice, vengeance, two sides of the same arrowhead. Matthew rose and moved to a cedar chest in the corner of the lodge. Your father left something here, many years ago. He said I would know when it was time to pass it on. From the chest, he withdrew a bundle wrapped in tanned deerskin. Carefully unwrapping it, he revealed an intricately beaded medicine pouch, a bone-handled knife with strange symbols etched into the blade, and a leather headband bearing a single eagle feather. The weapons of a Comanche warrior are not merely physical, Matthew explained, placing the items before her. The medicine pouch contains sacred herbs that will sharpen your senses. The knife was forged by your grandfather using metal from a fallen star. The headband marked your father as the son of a chief, and now marks you as his rightful heir. Emily reached out hesitantly to touch the items. As her fingers made contact with the medicine pouch, a strange warmth traveled up her arm. I don't know if I'm worthy of these. Worthiness is proven through action, not claimed through words, Matthew replied. Cole and his masters believe they face only a wounded woman, or more likely, believe you dead in the ashes of your home. They do not know they have awakened a warrior spirit that spans generations. The next week passed in a blur of training that tested Emily's healing body to its limits. Each morning began before dawn with prayers to the rising sun. Then came physical training, archery, knife fighting, tracking, moving silently through the underbrush. Matthew was a demanding teacher, pushing Emily beyond what she thought possible. Pain is temporary, he reminded her when she faltered, but failure against men like Cole means death, or worse. In the afternoons, Matthew taught her the Comanche ways of tracking and hunting. Emily learned to read sign that would be invisible to most white men's eyes. A bent blade of grass, the displacement of morning dew, the subtle difference between an animal's trail and a man's attempt to hide his passage. Your enemy believes himself a hunter, Matthew said, as they crouched over barely visible tracks left by a deer. But he has never been hunted by one who sees as we see, thinks as we think. Nights were devoted to medicine ways, the sacred, knowledge that had made Comanche warriors feared throughout the plains. Emily learned to concoct mixtures that would dull pain, others that would keep her alert for days without sleep, and still others that could be applied to arrowheads or knife blades. Not poison, Matthew corrected when she used that word. Medicine. All things can heal or harm. The difference lies in purpose and measure. He taught her to enter the spirit trance that would allow her to push beyond normal human limitations. A state where pain and fear became distant concerns, where clarity of purpose overcame all obstacles. This is how your father survived torture at the hands of enemies, Matthew explained. His body was present, but his spirit soared with the eagles, untouched by mortal suffering. On the final night of her training, Matthew led Emily to a sacred cave high in the canyon walls. Ancient pictographs covered the stone surfaces, hunting scenes, spirit journeys, tribal victories spanning centuries. Tonight, you will receive your vision, he told her, preparing a small fire at the center of the cave. You will face your deepest fears and emerge reborn. Into the flames he cast herbs from his own medicine pouch. Sweet-smelling smoke filled the cave as he began to sing in a low, hypnotic voice. Emily sat cross-legged before the fire, breathing deeply of the sacred smoke, letting Matthew's song guide her consciousness deeper. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time lost meaning as Emily's spirit separated from her body. In the vision state, she traveled across plains and mountains, through forests and deserts. She ran with wolves, soared with eagles, moved with the silent deadliness of the mountain lion. Then the landscape changed, becoming the burned ruins of her cabin. Cole and his men appeared, their faces twisted into monstrous masks as they surrounded her. Emily felt the old fear rising, threatening to overwhelm her. But this time, she didn't run or hide. Instead, she called upon the spirits of her ancestors. Around her materialized Comanche warriors on horseback painted for battle. At their head rode a figure she recognized from her father's descriptions. White Eagle himself, her grandfather, resplendent in the full regalia of a chief. "The strength of our people flows in your veins," White Eagle told her in the vision. Not just the strength to survive, the strength to triumph. One by one, the spirits of her ancestors approached, each bestowing a gift. From one, exceptional vision. From another, swift feet. From a third, hands steady enough to split an arrow at 100 paces. From White Eagle himself came the most precious gift: unwavering courage in the face of overwhelming odds. When Emily finally emerged from the trance, dawn was breaking over the eastern rim of the canyon. Matthew sat watching her, his expression knowing. "You have been blessed by the ancestors," he said simply. "What did they show you?" Emily rose to her feet, feeling stronger than she had ever felt before. The knife wound at her side had been a constant reminder of her vulnerability, but now she barely noticed it. "They showed me who I truly am," she answered. "Not just James Blackwood's daughter, not just Sarah Miller's child, but the granddaughter of White Eagle, heir to his strength and wisdom." Matthew nodded in approval. "Then you are ready." From a hidden niche in the cave wall, he produced a bundle wrapped in elk hide. "These belonged to your grandfather, then to your father. Now they are yours by right." Inside the bundle lay a pair of intricately beaded moccasins, buckskin leggings, and tunic dyed a deep indigo, the color of approaching night, and a bow crafted from horn and sinew that hummed with power when Emily tested its draw. "The blue is sacred," Matthew explained, "the color of the space between sunset and full darkness, the hunter's time, when prey cannot see, but the hunter still can." Emily dressed in the ceremonial garments, surprised at how perfectly they fit her frame. When she strapped the knife to her thigh and slung the bow across her back, something fundamental shifted inside her. Standing before Matthew was no longer the frightened homesteader who had barely escaped with her life, but a warrior born of two worlds, armed with the knowledge and blessing of both. "Remember, vengeance alone is an empty path," Matthew cautioned, as he mixed paint in a small stone bowl. "Seek justice, not merely blood." With practiced hands, he applied the sacred paint to Emily's face, a lightning bolt design across her forehead in white-black rings around her eyes to enhance vision, red streaks down her cheeks to symbolize the tears of her ancestors. "When Cole and his men see this," Matthew said, stepping back to examine his work, "their hearts will know fear, even if their minds do not understand why. Such is the power of ancient symbols." As the sun reached its zenith, Emily prepared to depart. Matthew had provided her with a sturdy pinto mare, not as familiar as her lost penny, but keen-eyed and sure-footed. "Cole rides for a man named Victor Harland," Matthew told her as she mounted, "a cattle baron from the back east, with powerful friends in Austin and Washington. Harland seeks to control all the water rights in 3 counties. Your land sits atop the largest natural spring in the territory." Emily's eyes narrowed. How do you know this? A rare smile crossed Matthew's weathered face. You think because I live apart from the white man's world that I do not watch it? I have many eyes and ears. Birds sing to me, wind carries voices, traders bring news. He handed her a small leather map. Harlan's ranch lies here, 30 miles southeast. But be warned, it is well guarded. Better to find Cole first, when he rides with fewer men. Where will I find him? 3 days from now, cattle buyers will arrive in Willow Creek. Cole and his men will be there to ensure no one interferes with Harlan's business. Matthew's expression grew solemn. But you cannot confront them alone, no matter your new strength. You need allies. Emily thought of the townsfolk in Willow Creek, most too afraid of Harlan's influence to stand against him openly. Who would stand with me? Your father had friends beyond his Comanche brothers. Seek out Samuel Wilson at the livery stable in Willow Creek. He served with your father during the war. Show him your grandfather's knife. He will know its significance. With final blessings exchanged, Emily urged her mount forward, leaving the sanctuary of Broken Rock Canyon. As she rode, she felt the weight of her dual heritage settling on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor. The journey to Willow Creek took 2 days of careful travel. Emily avoided the main trails, moving instead through wilderness paths known only to those with Comanche training. Twice she spotted Harlan's men patrolling the territory, but they never detected her presence. She made camp the second night on a ridge overlooking Willow Creek. Through her father's old spyglass, she studied the town that had once been a simple trading post, but had grown into a respectable settlement. Harlan's influence was evident in the new buildings bearing his brand, the increased number of armed men loitering on street corners. As night fell, Emily applied the sacred paint once more and slipped into town under cover of darkness. She moved like a shadow from alley to alley, avoiding the oil lamps that illuminated the main street. The livery stable stood at the north end of town, a large structure smelling of hay and horseflesh. A light burned in the small, attached cabin where the stable master lived. Emily approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows. Through the window, she could see an older man with a full white beard sitting at a table, cleaning a revolver by lamplight. Samuel Wilson had been a cavalry officer before turning to civilian life. The saber scar running down his left cheek and his ramrod-straight posture betrayed his military background even 20 years after hanging up his uniform. Emily knocked softly on the door, then melted back into the shadows. When Wilson opened the door, lantern held high, he saw only darkness. "Who's there?" he called, his free hand resting on the revolver tucked into his waistband. "A friend of James Blackwood," Emily answered, still concealed. Wilson stiffened at the name. "James has no friends in these parts anymore. Harlan saw to that. Show yourself." Emily stepped into the circle of lantern light, the sacred paint, on her face gleaming eerily in the golden glow. Wilson's eyes widened, first in shock, then in recognition. "Good Lord," he whispered. "You're his daughter, Emily." "I need your help," she said simply. Wilson glanced up and down the darkened street before gesturing her inside. Once the door was barred behind them, he turned to face her properly. "We heard your place was burned to the ground," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Everyone believes you died in the fire." That's what Cole wanted people to think. Emily withdrew her grandfather's knife, the strange symbols catching the lamplight. "My father said you would recognize this." Wilson stared at the blade, then nodded slowly. "White Eagle's knife. James showed it to me once, told me about his true heritage." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Why come to me now? Why not go to the sheriff?" Emily's laugh held no humor. "Sheriff Taylor, the man whose pockets are lined with Harlan's money." "Fair point," Wilson conceded. "But what do you think I can do against Harlan's small army?" "Help me find Cole first," Emily said. "I have no quarrel with Harlan yet. Only with the men, who destroyed my home and left me for dead. Wilson studied her face, the determination in her eyes, the proud set of her jaw. You look like him, you know. Not just in feature, but in spirit. He sighed heavily. What's your plan? Emily leaned forward, her voice dropping to ensure it wouldn't carry beyond the cabin's walls. As she outlined what she intended, Wilson's expression shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. It might work, he admitted when she finished. But even if it does, you've made an enemy of Victor Harland. No place in this territory will be safe for you afterward. Emily's smile was cold as winter moonlight. Perhaps, but first, let's make sure Jackson Cole and his men learn what it means to face a woman they thought they'd killed. A woman whose father is the son of a Comanche chief. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, the sound carrying clearly through the night air. To most of Willow Creek's inhabitants, it was simply the call of a predator hunting in the hills. But to Emily Blackwood, it was confirmation. The spirits of her ancestors watched and approved. Tomorrow, justice would begin. Dawn broke over. Willow Creek with a riot of golden light. The town stirred to life as shopkeepers unlocked their doors and ranch hands nursed hangovers from the previous night's indulgences. No one paid much attention to the stagecoach that arrived from the east, dust-covered and weary from the long journey. From the coach stepped a woman dressed in the latest Eastern fashion, a dark blue traveling dress with a high collar, her face obscured by a matching veil attached to an elegant hat. She carried herself with the poised confidence of wealth as she made her way to the Willow Creek Hotel, a porter struggling behind her with 2 large trunks. "Name, ma'am?" asked the hotel clerk, eyeing the quality of her clothing with new interest. Visitors of obvious means were rare in Willow Creek. "Margaret Caldwell," the woman replied, in a cultured accent that hinted at Boston finishing schools. "My father is William Caldwell of the Boston Mercantile Bank. I've come to evaluate investment opportunities in the region." The clerk's eyebrows rose. Harland had been trying to attract Eastern investors for months, boasting that Willow Creek would soon become the cattle capital of the territory. "We've got our finest room available, Miss Caldwell," he said, sliding the register toward her. "Will you be staying long?" "That depends entirely on what I find here," she answered, signing the book with a flourish. "I understand there's quite a bit of competition for land and water rights. My father is particularly interested in sustainable investments." The clerk's smile faltered slightly. Talk of competition for resources was sensitive in a town increasingly dominated by Victor Harland's interests. "Well, you'll want to speak with Mr. Harland about that," he said, lowering his voice. "He's the most established businessman in these parts." Margaret Caldwell inclined her head. "So I've heard. I believe he's hosting the cattle auction tomorrow. I should like to attend." "Yes, ma'am. It's normally just for ranchers and buyers. But—" The clerk glanced again at her fine clothing and the impressive signature in his register. "I'm sure an exception can be made for someone representing the Boston capital." Once alone in her room, Margaret Caldwell locked the door and drew the curtains. Only then did Emily Blackwood remove the suffocating veil and elaborate hat, running fingers through hair now cut short and dyed a rich chestnut brown. Another gift from Matthew Running Elk, who had shown her how to create permanent dyes from native plants. The fine Eastern clothing had come from Wilson's late wife's trunks, preserved all these years out of sentimental attachment. The Boston accent Emily had practiced for hours under Wilson's tutelage. He had served with a Massachusetts regiment during the war and could still perfectly mimic their distinctive speech patterns. Emily opened the larger of her 2 trunks. Beneath a layer of fashionable dresses lay her Comanche garments, her grandfather's knife, and her father's revolver, now cleaned and loaded. The second trunk contained something far more valuable: documents. During the night, Wilson had taken To visit Judge Franklin Hayes, a retired circuit judge who had lost his ranch to Harlan's machinations the previous year. Hayes now lived in a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, subsisting on a meager pension and nursing a deep grudge against the cattle baron. Hayes had not initially recognized the paint-streaked warrior woman who appeared on his doorstep. But he had recognized James Blackwood's name, and more importantly, he had kept detailed records of Harlan's activities during his time as judge. Harlan thinks, because he bought the current judge and sheriff, that his past crimes are buried, Hayes had told Emily, his rheumy eyes bright with the prospect of justice. But I documented everything, witnesses too scared to testify, evidence that mysteriously disappeared, the patterns of intimidation and violence against smaller landowners. The documents now hidden in Emily's trunk represented 3 years of meticulous record-keeping, proof of Harlan's criminal enterprise and Cole's role as his enforcer. Hayes had entrusted them to her on one condition. This must end with justice, not just revenge, he had insisted. I want Harlan facing a federal marshal and a proper trial, not just a bullet between the eyes, satisfying as that might be. Emily had given her word, though privately she wondered if Cole would leave her any choice when the moment came. Some men could only understand the language of violence they themselves spoke so fluently. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Emily quickly covered the documents and called out, "Yes?" "Telegram for Miss Caldwell," came the reply. Emily adjusted her dress and opened the door to find a young boy holding a yellow envelope. She tipped him generously. Margaret Caldwell would be noticed for her wealth as much as her beauty, and closed the door before opening the message. The telegram was brief. "Father informed. Arriving tomorrow noon. Proceed with caution." Wilson had sent word to James Blackwood as promised. Emily felt a complex mixture of emotions at the prospect of reuniting with her father. Relief, certainly. James was a formidable ally, but also apprehension. She had changed in ways that went beyond her dyed hair and borrowed finery. Would he recognize the warrior she had become? Would he approve? There was no time to dwell on such questions. Emily needed to establish Margaret Caldwell's presence in town before tomorrow's auction. She reapplied her makeup carefully, not the sacred war paint of her ancestors, but the subtle enhancements expected of a sophisticated Eastern lady, and prepared to make her first public appearance. The Willow Creek Saloon stood at the center of town, serving as both a watering hole and informal meeting place for the community. As Emily entered, conversations momentarily ceased, all eyes turning to appraise the newcomer. She noted with satisfaction that Jackson Cole sat at a corner table with one of the Daniels brothers, deep in conversation with a man she didn't recognize. Cole glanced up as she passed, his gaze lingering on her fine dress and confident bearing. There was no recognition in his eyes, just the familiar predatory assessment he likely directed at any attractive woman who crossed his path. Emily felt her hand twitch toward where her knife would normally be strapped, but forced herself to maintain her role. She took a table near enough to overhear snippets of their conversation, ordering a pot of tea with a disdainful glance at the whiskey being consumed by the other patrons. The bartender scrambled to accommodate her unusual request, clearly unaccustomed to serving anything more refined than rot-gut liquor. "Shipment coming in through Fort Worth," Cole was saying to his companion, his voice low but carrying in the now quiet saloon. "Harlan wants it handled discreetly. Risky move before the auction," the stranger replied. "What if Blackwood gets wind of it?" At the mention of her father's name, Emily's ears sharpened. She sipped her tea delicately, giving no outward sign of her intense interest. Cole snorted. "Blackwood's been chasing his tail for weeks. Besides, even if he shows his face here, Taylor will handle him. Sheriff's got standing orders to detain him on some trumped-up charge if he comes nosing around." The stranger looked unconvinced. "I don't know, Jackson. Blackwood's got a reputation. They say he tracked the McAllister gang across 3 territories. without losing their trail once. Superstitious nonsense, Cole dismissed. People hear he's half Indian, and suddenly he's some kind of mystical tracker. He's just a man, bleeds the same as anyone. Emily suppressed a cold smile. Let them underestimate her father. That same mistake had cost many outlaws their freedom or their lives. Her presence had not gone unnoticed by others in the saloon. A well-dressed man in his 50s approached her table, hat in hand. His tailored suit and gold watch chain marked him as someone of means, though his weathered face suggested he had earned his fortune through hard work rather than inheritance. "Miss Caldwell? Forgive my presumption, but word travels fast in a small town. I'm Victor Harland." He offered a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "May I join you?" Emily inclined her head graciously. "Mr. Harland, your reputation precedes you." "All good things, I hope." He settled into the chair opposite, her signaling for the bartender to bring him a drink. "That depends entirely on one's perspective, doesn't it?" Emily replied with a diplomatic smile. "I understand you've been quite aggressive in your business acquisitions locally." Harland's expression hardened momentarily, before smoothing into affability once more. "Growth requires vision, Miss Caldwell. Not everyone appreciates progress while it's happening." "Indeed." Emily sipped her tea. "My father has tasked me with finding sustainable investment opportunities. We prefer situations where all parties benefit. It makes for fewer complications down the line." "A commendable philosophy," Harland said, though his tone suggested he found it naive. "Perhaps you'd allow me to show you my operation tomorrow." "Before the auction? I think you'd be impressed by the scale of what we've built here." Emily recognized the invitation for what it was. A chance for Harland to dazzle a potential investor with his empire, perhaps secure funding that didn't come with the strings attached by his current backers. It was also a perfect opportunity to gather intelligence on his operation from the inside. That would be most educational, she agreed. "Shall we say 9 o'clock? Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the saloon entrance. A young cowhand burst through the doors, his face pale beneath his tan. "Mr. Harland, there's trouble at the north pasture fence line. Someone cut the wire and drove off 30 head of your prime stock." Harland's facade of gentility evaporated instantly. "Cole!" he barked, rising to his feet. "Get your men! Now!" Cole and Daniels were already moving, hands instinctively checking their weapons. The third man remained seated, looking uncertain. "Watch the town, Marcus," Cole instructed him. "This could be a diversion." Emily hid her satisfaction behind a mask of concerned confusion. The cattle rustling was indeed a diversion, orchestrated by Wilson and several ranch hands who still resented Harland's takeover of their former employer's land. It would draw Cole and his core men away from town, just long enough for Emily to execute the next phase of her plan. "How unfortunate," she murmured to Harland. "I do hope this won't affect tomorrow's arrangements." Harland's smile was tight as he donned his hat. "Not at all, Miss Caldwell. A minor inconvenience only. I look forward to our meeting in the morning." As the men departed in a flurry of activity, Emily finished her tea unhurriedly. She could feel curious gazes on her from around the saloon, but maintained her composure. Only when she judged sufficient time had passed did she rise gracefully and make her way back to the hotel. Night fell over Willow Creek, bringing with it a tense silence. Most townsfolk had heard about the rustling incident and locked their doors early, fearful of what reprisals might follow. Harland was not known for his restraint when crossed. In her hotel room, Emily shed the constricting eastern garments and changed into dark trousers and a fitted black shirt, nondescript clothing that would allow her to move through the darkness, undetected. She braided her dyed hair tightly against her scalp and smudged dirt across her pale features to eliminate any telltale gleam of skin in the moonlight. The town marshal's office sat dark and quiet on the main street. According to Wilson, Marshal Taylor kept evidence and official documents in a large safe behind his desk, including land deeds seized during Harlan's various acquisitions. Emily approached from the alley behind the building, testing the back window carefully. It was unlocked. Few in Willow Creek would dare break into the marshal's office with Harlan's protection behind it. Using skills Matthew had taught her, she eased the window open without a sound and slipped inside. The office was spare and functional. A desk, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and 3 jail cells along the back wall. Moonlight filtering through the windows provided just enough illumination for Emily to make out the safe behind the desk. She knelt before it, pressing her ear against the cold metal as she gently manipulated the dial. Matthew had taught her more than just tracking and hunting during those weeks in Broken Rock Canyon. Among his many skills was an uncanny ability to open locks with nothing but patience and sensitive fingertips. Listen to the mechanism, he had instructed her. Feel its resistance. The metal will speak to you if you learn its language. Minutes stretched into an hour as Emily worked, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air. Just as she was beginning to fear the safe would defeat her, something clicked into place, and the heavy door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Inside lay stacks of official documents, bundles of cash, and several small bags that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. Emily ignored the money, focusing instead on the papers. She quickly located what she sought, a bundle of land deeds, including one for her own property, notarized with forged signatures, claiming she had sold the land to Harlan Cattle Company. Tucked behind these was something unexpected, a leather ledger book, with Harlan's personal cipher stamped on the cover. Emily hesitated only briefly before adding it to the documents she would take. Judge Hayes might find it useful in building his case. As she prepared to close the safe, a floorboard creaked behind her. Emily froze, her hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt. "I wouldn't if I were you," came a slow drawl. Emily turned slowly to find Marcus, the man who had been with Cole at the saloon, standing in the doorway, a revolver trained steadily on her chest. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized her face in the moonlight. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "You're supposed to be dead, girl." "Disappointed?" Emily asked, carefully shifting her weight to the balls of her feet. Marcus shook his head. "Just surprised. Cole usually doesn't make mistakes like that." He gestured with the gun. "Stand up. Slow." Emily rose, the documents clutched in her left hand, her right hanging seemingly passive at her side, though her fingers were inches from her knife hilt. "What's your play here?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Stealing back your deed won't do you much good. Harlan owns the judge, the marshal, the mayor, hell, half the territory." "Justice doesn't always come through official channels," Emily replied. "Sometimes it rides from unexpected quarters." Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. "That rustling tonight, that was you, wasn't it?" "A diversion." His lips quirked in reluctant admiration. "Smart, but it won't save you. Cole will be back by morning." "I'm counting on it," Emily said with calm certainty. Marcus frowned, confused by her lack of fear. That momentary distraction was all she needed. In one fluid motion, faster than Marcus could track, Emily drew and threw her knife. The blade embedded itself in his right shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain and shock. His gun discharged, the bullet splintering the desk beside Emily as she launched herself forward. Before Marcus could recover, Emily had crossed the room and delivered a precise strike to his throat. Not enough to kill, but sufficient to leave him gasping and disoriented. She relieved him of his weapon and used his own bandana to gag him before binding his hands and feet with rope from the marshal's supplies. "You're making a mistake," Marcus wheezed once she removed the gag. "You can't fight Harlan's whole operation alone." Emily retrieved her knife, wiping the blade clean on Marcus's shirt. "Who said I'm alone?" With the documents secured and Marcus locked in one of the cells, Emily slipped back into the night. By the time his absence was noted, Margaret Caldwell would be preparing for her morning meeting with Victor Harland, and James Blackwood would be riding into Willow Creek from the north. The pieces were moving into position. Tomorrow would bring either justice or death, perhaps both. Emily melted into the shadows, a silent promise on her lips. The men who had left her for dead would soon learn the cost of awakening a warrior's blood. Morning arrived with an unusual stillness over Willow Creek. The town's normal bustle seemed muted, as if holding its breath in anticipation of events to come. At precisely 8:45, Margaret Caldwell emerged from the hotel in a riding habit of deep burgundy, her chestnut hair arranged in an elegant coiffure beneath a matching hat. She moved with the confident poise of old money, nodding cordially. To those she passed, a magnificent black stallion waited at the hitching post outside, saddled and ready. Beside it stood Victor Harland, dressed in his finest, a carefully cultivated smile on his weathered face. "Miss Caldwell," he greeted her, with a slight bow. "I trust you slept well?" "Tolerably," Emily replied in Margaret's cultured tones, "though I was disturbed by some commotion in the early hours. Was your rustling situation resolved satisfactorily?" A flash of annoyance crossed Harland's features before he masked it. "A minor inconvenience only. The perpetrators left an obvious trail. My men are pursuing them as we speak." Emily knew better. Wilson and his confederates had used every trick Matthew had taught her about concealing tracks. By now, the stolen cattle were safely back in their original pasture, leaving Cole and his men chasing ghosts across the countryside. "How fortunate," she murmured, allowing Harland to assist her onto the side saddle. An arrangement she found, ridiculous but necessary for her disguise. "Shall we proceed? I'm eager to see this empire you're building." They rode at a leisurely pace out of town, Harland pointing out properties and businesses he had acquired over the years. Emily noted with dismay how much of the surrounding territory now bore his brand. The stylized HD for Harland Dominion burned into fence posts, cattle, and buildings alike. Most of these smaller operations were failing, Harland explained as they passed what had once been the Peterson Ranch. The owners lacked vision, resources, or both. I offered fair compensation. "How generous," Emily remarked, her tone carefully neutral. She remembered the Petersons, kind neighbors who had attended her mother's funeral. Their ranch had mysteriously burned just months before her own cabin met the same fate. Their path took them alongside a stream that Emily recognized as a tributary to the wider river that cut through her property. Even in the dry season, it ran clear and strong, a precious resource in this often parched territory. "Water rights are the true currency out here," Harland said, following her gaze. "More valuable than gold. Control the water, and you control everything else. A philosophy that has served you well, clearly." Harland studied her expression, perhaps searching for judgment. Finding none in her carefully composed features, he continued, "We're consolidating smaller operations into a single, efficient enterprise. Progress demands sacrifice from some for the benefit of many." "And who determines which sacrifices are necessary?" Emily asked, watching a hawk circle overhead, a red-tailed hunter patient in its surveillance. Harland laughed, the sound lacking. "Warmth. That's the beauty of the free market, Miss Caldwell. It sorts the wheat from the chaff naturally." He gestured ahead, where a massive ranch house rose from the plains like a declaration of dominance. "Welcome to Harland Dominion's headquarters." The house was an incongruous vision of eastern opulence transplanted to the frontier. A two-story mansion with white columns and broad verandas, surrounded by well-tended gardens that must have required constant irrigation. Beyond it spread corrals, bunkhouses, and outbuildings that comprised the working heart of the ranch. Impressive, Emily acknowledged, and it was. She had never seen such ostentation outside of paintings and magazine illustrations. Harland helped her dismount, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Built it with my own hands," he boasted, though Emily doubted he had driven a single nail personally. "Started with nothing but 20 head of longhorn and a talent for recognizing opportunity." He guided her through the house, pointing out imported furnishings and artwork collected during trips back east. Emily played her role perfectly, expressing appropriate admiration while gathering details about the operation. She noted with interest the large study with its wall safe, likely containing documents even more damning than those she had recovered from the marshal's office. Their tour concluded on the back veranda overlooking the main corral, where dozens of prime cattle milled about. Ranch hands scurried to prepare them for tomorrow's auction, sorting and grooming the best specimens. "You'll join me at the auction, of course," Harland said as a servant brought refreshments. "As my personal guest." "I wouldn't miss it," Emily assured him, sipping lemonade that was mercifully cool despite the growing heat of the day. "Though I understand a U.S. Marshal may be arriving today. That seems an unusual presence for a routine cattle auction." Harland's hand stilled momentarily before he set down his glass with deliberate casualness. "Where did you hear that?" Emily offered an innocent smile. "Hotel gossip. The telegraph operator mentioned it to the desk clerk. Something about Marshal Blackwood." The name hung in the air between them. Harland's expression hardened imperceptibly. "James Blackwood occasionally passes through on official business. Nothing that need concern potential investors." "Of course not," Emily agreed, maintaining her facade of polite interest, though his reputation is quite fascinating. "They say he can track a man across bare rock and knows the language of the wind. Frontier superstition," Harland dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Blackwood is just a man with a badge, and men can be reasoned with, one way or another." Before Emily could respond, the thunder of approaching hooves drew their attention. A rider approached at breakneck speed, dust billowing behind him. Emily recognized the younger Daniel's brother, his face flushed with exertion and urgency as he reined his lathered horse to a stop before the veranda. "Mr. Harland," he gasped, doffing his hat. "We got in trouble. Marcus is locked up in the jail, and someone broke into the safe last night." Harland's expression darkened dangerously. "Who found him?" "Taylor, about an hour ago. Marcus says it was a woman, dark-haired, moved like an Indian." Daniels glanced nervously at Emily. "Begging your pardon, ma'am." "What was taken?" Harland demanded, his genteel mask slipping further. "Land deeds, your private ledger, some cash." "The ledger?" Harland's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You're certain?" Daniels nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. The one with the cipher stamp." Emily watched as Harland's composure crumbled entirely, his face flushed crimson, a vein pulsing at his temple. "Get Cole back here now. I don't care if he has to ride that horse into the ground, and tell Taylor to deputize every man he can trust. I want that ledger found before—" He caught himself, seeming to suddenly remember Emily's presence. With visible effort, he reassembled his mask of civility. "My apologies, Miss Caldwell. A minor security issue that requires my attention. Perhaps we should conclude our tour and return to town." "Of course," Emily replied, feigning concern. "I do hope your employee is unharmed." "Marcus will recover," Harland said darkly. "Unlike whoever is responsible for this incident." The ride back to Willow Creek was tense, with Harland repeatedly scanning the horizon as if expecting attack. Emily maintained her role flawlessly, expressing appropriate concern while probing for additional information under the guise of investors' curiosity. As they crested the final hill overlooking the town, Harland suddenly reined his horse to a stop. Emily followed his gaze to the main street below, where a solitary rider had just arrived. Even at this distance, James Blackwood cut an unmistakable figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat his horse with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. His black duster flared behind him like wings, the silver marshal's star catching the midday sun as he dismounted before the sheriff's office. "Right on schedule," Harland muttered seemingly to himself. "An acquaintance of yours?" Emily inquired innocently. Harland's laugh held no humor. "Blackwood and I have crossed paths. He disapproves of my business methods." His eyes narrowed as he observed the marshal disappear into the building. "Excuse me, Miss Caldwell, but I need to attend to this situation personally. My foreman will escort you safely back to the hotel." As if summoned by his words, another rider approached from the ranch, a weathered man with a face like tanned leather, who introduced himself simply as Quinn. Harland exchanged brief instructions with him before spurring his horse toward a town, leaving Emily to follow at a more sedate pace with her new escort. "You picked an interesting time to visit Willow Creek, ma'am," Quinn remarked as they rode. "Place ain't usually this exciting." "So I gather," Emily replied, studying the man carefully. Unlike Cole and the others, Quinn's eyes held no malice. Just the weary resignation of a man who had seen too much but needed his job too badly to question his employer's methods. "Mr. Harland seems concerned about Marshal Blackwood's arrival," she prodded gently. Quinn snorted. "That's putting it mild. Those two have been circling each other like wolves for 3 years now. Blackwood thinks the boss has been using strong-arm tactics against smaller ranchers. Boss thinks Blackwood should mind federal business and leave. Local matters be. And what do you think, Mr. Quinn?" The foreman gave her a surprised look, as if unused to being asked his opinion. "Ain't my place to think, ma'am. I just run the hands and keep the herd moving." They had reached the outskirts of town, where unusual activity was evident. Men with rifles gathering in small groups, eyeing the marshal's office warily. Emily spotted Wilson at the livery stable, ostentatiously polishing a saddle while keeping watch on the proceedings. "Looks like the boss is calling in his markers," Quinn observed, his voice tinged with resignation. "You might want to stay in your room this afternoon, ma'am. Town's fixing to get unpleasant." Emily thanked him for the escort and dismounted at the hotel entrance. Inside, the normally placid lobby hummed with nervous energy as the clerk and several guests discussed the arrival of the famous marshal and Harland's obvious displeasure. "They say he's here about those homesteaders that got burned out," a drummer was telling anyone who would listen. "That Blackwood girl and the Petersons. Folks are saying it wasn't accidental. Keep your voice down," the clerk hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. "You want to end up like them?" Emily proceeded to her room, locking the door behind her. The next phase of her plan required perfect timing. From her window, she had a clear view of the main street and the marshal's office, where Harland had just arrived with Cole and several armed men. She changed quickly into practical clothes that would allow freedom of movement while still maintaining her disguise. The documents she had stolen were hidden beneath a loose floorboard, safely away from any search Harland might order. A soft knock at her door startled her. Hand moving to her concealed knife, Emily approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Delivery. For Miss Caldwell," came the reply, a woman's voice, unfamiliar but steady. Emily opened the door a crack to find a young maid holding a sealed envelope. "Just arrived by messenger, ma'am." The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with a message in Wilson's cramped handwriting. "Father detained. Cole knows. Coming for you. Backstairs. Now." As if to punctuate the warning, shouting erupted from the street below. Emily moved to the window to see Cole and 4 men crossing toward the hotel at a determined pace, hands hovering near their weapons. Emily gathered only what was essential: the stolen documents, her knife, and her father's revolver. The fine dresses and Eastern trappings of Margaret Caldwell were left behind as she slipped into the hallway and toward the service stairs at the rear of the building. She had nearly reached the back entrance when Cole's voice rang out from the lobby. Check every room. The woman's here somewhere. Emily quickened her pace, emerging into the alley behind the hotel just as boots thundered on the stairs behind her. She pressed herself into a shadowed doorway as one of Harlan's men burst out, scanning the alley with his hand on his gun. When he turned away from her hiding place, Emily moved with the silent efficiency Matthew had taught her. One arm locked around the man's throat, while her other hand clamped over his mouth, stifling any cry for help. She applied precise pressure to the side of his neck, and within seconds he slumped unconscious in her grasp. Dragging his limp form deeper into the shadows, Emily relieved him of his gun belt before continuing down the alley. Her destination was the abandoned cooperage at the edge of town, where Wilson had arranged to meet if their plan went awry. She moved from shadow to shadow, freezing in place whenever Harlan's men crossed her path. The town had taken on the atmosphere of an armed camp, with regular citizens hurrying to the safety of their homes while Harlan's hired guns patrolled openly. Emily had nearly reached the cooperage when a familiar figure stepped into her path. The older Daniel's brother stood blocking the narrow passage between buildings, a shotgun cradled in his arms and a look of malicious recognition spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled. "Little Miss Blackwood, back from the dead." His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "Cole's going to be mighty disappointed in himself when he finds out he didn't finish the job proper." Emily assessed her options in an instant. The passage was too narrow for her to rush him before he could fire, and the shotgun spread would make dodging impossible at this range. "Harlan sent you to kill me," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "Just like he sent Cole to burn me out." Daniel shrugged. "Nothing personal, just business." "It became personal when you helped destroy my home," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "When you stood by while Cole used his knife on me." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Not quite guilt, but perhaps discomfort. "You should have just sold the land, girl. Nobody needed to get hurt." "Many people got hurt," Emily countered. "The Petersons, the Millers, all the families of Harlan drove off their land through intimidation and violence. It ends now." Daniels's expression hardened. "Only thing ending today is you, again." He raised the shotgun to his shoulder. "Any last words you want me to pass along to your pa before Harlan deals with him too?" Emily held his gaze, unflinching. "Just 4. Look behind you, Mr. Daniels." It was the oldest trick in existence, and yet some instinct made Daniels hesitate, uncertainty flickering across his face. That momentary doubt was all the opening Emily needed. Her hand flashed to a small leather pouch at her belt, another gift from Matthew. In one fluid motion, she flung a handful of fine powder directly at Daniel's face. The mixture of dried herbs and crushed minerals struck his eyes just as he began to turn, drawing an agonized howl as the burning sensation temporarily blinded him. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the dirt as Daniels clawed at his eyes. Emily was on him in an instant, driving her knee into his stomach before delivering a precise strike to his throat that left him gasping for air. As he crumpled to his knees, Emily relieved him of the shotgun and his sidearm. "That was for the Petersons," she told him coldly. "Consider yourself fortunate compared to what awaits Cole." Binding and gagging the incapacitated man with his own bandana and belt, Emily dragged him deeper into the shadows between buildings. The shot would attract attention, and she needed to move quickly now that her identity was compromised. The cooperage loomed just ahead, a large barrel-shaped building that had once housed Willow Creek's thriving barrel-making business before Harlan's monopolistic practices drove it under. As Emily approached, she noted with concern that there was no sign of Wilson or any of their allies. The heavy wooden door stood partially ajar, a warning sign. Wilson would never have left it open if all was well. Emily set down her burden of weapons and documents, drawing her knife as she crept silently toward the entrance. From within came the sound of voices, among them the cold, measured tones of Jackson Cole. "Your loyalty to Blackwood is touching, old man," Cole was saying, "but misplaced. Tell me where the girl is, and I might let you keep enough teeth to eat soft foods in your retirement." Wilson's reply was defiant, if pained. "Go to hell, Cole. You and Harlan both." The sound of a blow followed, then Wilson's grunt of pain. Emily peered through a crack in the weathered boards, assessing the situation within. Wilson was tied to a chair in the center of the open space, his face already bloodied from Cole's interrogation. 3 of Harlan's men stood watching, weapons drawn. Of Cole himself, Emily could see only a partial silhouette as he circled Wilson like a predator toying with wounded prey. The odds were impossible. 4 armed men against 1. Even with the element of surprise, Emily couldn't hope to overcome them before Wilson paid the price. She needed a diversion, or an ally, or a hand closed over her mouth from behind, stifling her instinctive cry of alarm. Emily drove her elbow backward, connecting with solid muscle as a familiar voice murmured in her ear, "Easy, little eagle, it's me." Emily froze, then slowly turned to face the man she had not seen in nearly a year, her father, James Blackwood. Though his black hair now showed streaks of silver at the temples, his blue eyes still burned with the same intensity she remembered from childhood. "You're supposed to be in jail," she whispered once he removed his hand from her mouth. A smile ghosted across his stern features. "Harlan's men aren't as competent as he believes." His gaze softened as he studied her face. "Matthew sent word about what happened. I came as soon as I could." Emily felt a complex surge of emotions, relief, love, and lingering uncertainty about how he would view her transformation. "I couldn't wait," she explained. "They burned everything and—" "Later," James said gently, squeezing her shoulder. "First we free Wilson, then we end this together." For the first time since Cole's knife had plunged into her side, Emily felt something long dormant bloom in her chest. Hope. With her father beside her, Harlan's reign of terror might truly end today. James assessed the cooperation with the tactical eye that had made him a legendary marshal. "Back entrance through the storage room," he murmured. "I'll circle around. When you hear my signal, create a distraction at the main door, but don't engage unless absolutely necessary." Emily nodded, understanding the plan immediately. As James melted into the shadows with a stealth that belied his size, she gathered her strength for what was to come. Justice was within reach at last, not just for her, but for all those Harlan and Cole had victimized in their ruthless quest for power. Emily counted her heartbeats as she waited for her father's signal, each second stretching like hours. Inside the copperage, Cole continued his brutal interrogation of Wilson, whose defiant responses were growing weaker. "The Blackwood girl is finished," Cole said, his voice carrying through the weathered boards. "Even if she somehow survived, she's one woman against all of Harlan's men. What do you hope to accomplish by protecting her?" Wilson coughed, spitting blood onto the dirt floor. "You still don't understand, do you? It was never just about Emily." "Enlighten me, old man," Cole replied, the sound of a match being struck following his words. The scent of cigar smoke drifted through the cracks. "This town, this territory, it belongs to the people who built it, not to men like Harlan who steal it piece by piece." Wilson's voice gained strength as he spoke. "Emily's just the beginning. Others will stand up too, once they see it can be done." Cole's laugh was cold. "Noble sentiment. I'll be sure to engrave it on your headstone." The sharp cry of a hawk cut through the tension. 3 short calls, the signal Emily had been waiting for. Her father was in position. Taking a deep breath, she moved to the front of the cooperage, positioning herself beside the main entrance. From the leather pouch at her belt, Emily withdrew a small clay sphere, another of Matthew's creations. She struck it sharply against the wall before tossing it through the partially opened door, then pressed herself flat against the exterior wall. The sphere shattered upon impact with the floor inside, releasing a cloud of reddish powder that filled the space with acrid smoke. Shouts of confusion erupted from within, followed by the sound of coughing and cursing. "What the hell?" Cole's voice rose above the commotion. "Get that door open! We need air!" The door burst outward as one of Harlan's men stumbled through, eyes streaming from the irritant smoke. Emily seized his arm, using his own momentum to propel him headfirst into the wall. He crumpled without a sound, and she appropriated his revolver before he hit the ground. Inside, chaos reigned. The reddish smoke reduced visibility to arm's length, transforming familiar shapes into looming shadows. Through the haze, Emily could make out two figures struggling near the back entrance, her father grappling with one of Cole's men. Cole himself was nowhere to be seen, but a third gunman was staggering toward Wilson, revolver raised. Emily took aim with her newly acquired weapon and fired. The shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain. "Behind you!" Wilson shouted, his voice hoarse from smoke and abuse. Emily whirled just as Cole emerged from the haze like a vengeful spirit, his face contorted with rage. Recognition flashed in his eyes as he brought his gun to bear. "You," he snarled, "should have made sure you were dead." Emily dived to the side as Cole's bullet tore through the space she had occupied a split second earlier. Rolling to her feet, she fired twice in rapid succession, forcing him back into the cover of smoke. From the rear of the cooperage came the sound of fists on flesh, followed by a heavy thud. James Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos. "Emily! Get Wilson out, now!" Keeping her gun trained on the swirling smoke where Cole had disappeared, Emily moved to Wilson's side. The older man was slumped in his chair, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, but conscious. "Told you your father would come," he wheezed, as she sliced through his bindings with her knife. "Can you walk?" Emily asked, helping him to his feet. Wilson swayed but remained upright. "Been through worse in the war. Go help your pa. I can manage." A shot rang out from the back of the copperage, followed by a grunt of pain. Emily's heart seized. "Father!" "Go!" Wilson insisted, pushing her toward the sound. "I'll cover the front." Emily plunged into the thinning smoke, navigating by sound and instinct. The layout of the cooperage was simple. A large central space surrounded by storage rooms where barrels had once been stacked to age their contents. From one such room came the sounds of struggle. Emily approached cautiously, her grandfather's knife in one hand, the revolver in the other. Through the doorway, she glimpsed two figures locked in combat, her father and a man she recognized as the second Daniel's brother. James had the upper hand, but blood stained his left sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. As Emily moved to assist, a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. The momentary distraction was enough for Daniels to break free and drive a knee into James's wounded arm. Emily didn't hesitate. As Daniels reached for his fallen weapon, she crossed the distance in 3 swift strides and brought the butt of her revolver down on the back of his head. He collapsed forward, unconscious before he hit the floor. "Nice. Timing," James said, breathing heavily as he retrieved his own weapon. "Where's Cole?" "Lost him in the smoke," Emily replied, checking her father's wound with practiced hands. "It's not deep," she assessed, tearing a strip from her shirt to bind it. James nodded, his eyes moving past her to the doorway. "We need to move. Cole won't be far, and he'll have sent for reinforcements." Together, they returned to the main area, now largely clear of smoke. Wilson had made his way to the entrance, where he leaned heavily against the doorframe, keeping watch. "No sign of Cole," he reported as they approached. "But Harlan's men are gathering in the street, words spreading fast." James considered their options with the tactical assessment that had made him a legend among both lawmen and outlaws. "The jail's our best option, defensible position, and I can send telegrams for federal reinforcements. Harland owns the sheriff, Emily reminded him. Taylor won't stand with us. A grim smile touched her father's face. Taylor's taking an unexpected nap in his own cells, courtesy of a pressure point your grandfather taught me long ago. Despite the dire circumstances, Emily felt a flash of pride at this evidence that her father had embraced his Comanche heritage when necessary. Perhaps he would understand her own transformation better than she had feared. We need to get these to Judge Hayes, she said, producing the documents she had recovered from the marshal's safe. Harland's private ledger, land deeds with forged signatures, enough evidence to bring federal charges. James examined the papers briefly, approval warming his stern features. Good work. This connects Harland directly to at least 7 cases of land theft I've been investigating. He tucked the documents securely inside his coat. But first, we need to deal with Cole. He'll be waiting for us, Wilson warned. Man's got the devil's own cunning. Let him wait, James replied. We'll take the back alleys to the jail. Emily, you know the way? She nodded. During her reconnaissance of the town, she had mapped every possible route between key buildings. Follow me. They slipped out the rear entrance of the cooperage, Emily leading the way with her father supporting Wilson. The narrow passages between buildings provided cover from the main street, where Harland's men were indeed gathering in increasing numbers. Their progress was slow but steady until they reached the alley behind the general store, the last stretch before the jail. Emily peered around the corner, assessing the open ground they would need to cross. Clear for now, she whispered, but there's no cover for the last 30 yards. James nodded thoughtfully. I'll go first with Wilson. If we draw fire, you circle around and flank them. Before Emily could protest this plan that put him at greater risk, a new voice interrupted from behind them. A sound strategy, Marshal, but ultimately futile. They turned to find Victor Harland himself, standing at the mouth of the alley, flanked by 4 armed men. His elegant attire was incongruous against the backdrop of weathered boards and trash barrels, but the revolver in his hand looked entirely at home. Blackwood, he acknowledged with a cold nod. I expected more from a man of your reputation than breaking and entering, assault on lawful deputies, and harboring a fugitive. The only fugitive here is you, Harland, James replied, his voice level despite their precarious position. I have enough evidence to see you hang for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and likely worse once we start digging. Harland's smile never reached his eyes. Evidence gathered illegally by your daughter, who, I remind you, is wanted for the assault of Marshal Taylor and theft of official documents. His gaze shifted to Emily, recognition replacing his earlier dismissal of Margaret Caldwell. Miss Blackwood, he said, tipping his hat in mock courtesy, a remarkable performance. Had circumstances been different, I might have offered you a position in my organization. Such versatility is rare. I've seen what happens to people in your organization, Emily replied coldly. I'll take my chances with a trial. Harland sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. There won't be a trial, I'm afraid. Cole was quite insistent that you both meet with an unfortunate accident while resisting arrest. Something about finishing a job properly. At the mention of Cole, Emily tensed. Where was he? Harland wouldn't confront them personally without his enforcer nearby. Your reign ends today, Victor, James said with quiet certainty. One way or another. Harland's expression hardened. Take them, he ordered his men, alive if possible, but I won't weep either way. As the gunman moved forward, a shot rang out from the rooftop of the general store. One of Harland's men cried out, clutching, his arm as his weapon clattered to the ground. Before the others could react, 2 more shots cracked in rapid succession, forcing them to dive for cover. Emily looked up to see Matthew Running Elk rising from his position on the roof, bow in hand. The medicine man had traded his traditional weapons for a Winchester rifle, but the deadly accuracy of his shots proved his warrior skills remained undiminished. "The half-breed brings reinforcements," Harland sneered, ducking behind a water barrel. "No matter, Cole has a surprise waiting at the jail." Taking advantage of the confusion, James pushed Wilson toward Emily. "Get him to cover," he commanded, before turning to face Harland, his marshal's badge catching the sunlight as he drew himself to his full height. "Victor Harland," he announced in a voice that carried throughout the alley, "by the authority vested in me as a United States Marshal, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice." Harland's laugh held an edge of madness. "You still don't understand, do you? There's no law here but mine. I bought this town piece by piece. I own the sheriff, the judge, the mayor. Your badge means nothing." "Then perhaps you'll respect this," came a new voice as Judge Franklin Hayes stepped into view from a side passage, a shotgun braced against his shoulder. Despite his age and infirmity, he stood straight-backed and resolute. "The people of this territory have had enough of your tyranny, Harland." More figures appeared at various points around the alley. Peterson's eldest son, the Millers, other ranchers and townspeople who had suffered under Harland's regime. Each was armed, their expressions grim with long-suppressed fury. Finally, finding an outlet, Harland's confidence faltered visibly as he registered the turning tide. His remaining men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly calculating whether their loyalty was worth dying for. "Stand down," James advised them. "Don't throw your lives away for him." Two of the gunmen promptly raised their hands in surrender. The third hesitated, looking to Harland for direction. "Cowards!" Harland spat. "Cole will deal with you all." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jackson Cole appeared at the far end of the alley, rifle raised. "Down!" James shouted, tackling Emily and Wilson to the ground as Cole's first shot whistled overhead. Matthew's answering fire from the rooftop forced Cole to duck into a doorway, but not before he had wounded one of the townspeople who had stood with Hayes. The alley erupted into chaos as Harland used the distraction to make his break, sprinting toward where Cole provided covering fire. Emily disentangled herself from her father's protective embrace, determination hardening her features. "He's getting away," she said, already moving to pursue. James caught her arm. "Emily, no! Cole's too dangerous." "This ends now," she replied, her voice calm but implacable. "You handle Harland. Cole is mine." Something in her expression, perhaps a recognition of the warrior spirit they shared, made James release her arm. "Be careful, daughter. He has nothing left to lose." Emily nodded once before slipping into the labyrinth of passages between buildings, tracking Cole's retreat. Behind her, she heard her father organizing the townspeople, his commanding presence restoring order to the chaos Harland had left in his wake. She moved with the silent efficiency Matthew had taught her, following signs imperceptible to untrained eyes. A fresh scuff on weathered wood, the displacement of dust on a windowsill, the faint impression of a boot heel in packed earth. The trail led toward the livery stable at the north end of town. As Emily approached, she sensed rather than saw movement within the shadowed interior. Cole was waiting for her. This she knew with bone-deep certainty. What he didn't know was that she was no longer the frightened homesteader he had left for dead. Emily circled the building, noting the positions of doors and windows, assessing angles and cover. A direct confrontation would be foolish. Cole was a deadly shot with his rifle and would expect her to come charging in, fueled by revenge. Instead, she ascended to the hayloft, using handholds in the exterior wall that would have challenged even the most skilled climber. Matthew's training had transformed her body as well as her mind, granting a strength and agility that now served her perfectly. Through a gap in the weathered boards, Emily surveyed the stable's interior. Cole stood with his back to a support post, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the main entrance. 2 saddled horses waited nearby, his escape plan if things went badly. Emily withdrew one of the small clay spheres from her pouch. This one contained no irritant smoke, but would serve as a distraction. She tossed it lightly through the gap, sending it arcing to land with a soft thud in the straw near the horses. The animals shifted nervously at the unexpected sound, drawing Cole's attention momentarily away from the door. It was all the opening Emily needed. She slipped silently through the gap and dropped to a stack of hay bales, her landing muffled by the soft material. "Come on out, girl," Cole called, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Let's finish what we started at your cabin." Emily remained motionless, letting him reveal his position with each word. He had moved toward the horses, still scanning the door and windows. "Your pa can't save you," he continued, frustration edging his voice as the silence stretched. "He's got his hands full with Harland. It's just you and me now." He was right about that much, Emily thought as she drew her knife. Just the two of them, predator and prey. But Cole had fatally miscalculated which was which. She launched herself from the hay bales in a controlled descent, her body an arrow aimed at his exposed back. Cole sensed the attack too late, whirling just as Emily's weight drove him to the ground, his rifle skittering away across the packed earth. "You," he gasped, recognition and shock warring in his eyes as they rolled across the stable floor. Emily used her momentum to gain the upper position, her knife pressed to his throat. "Remember me now?" she asked, her voice eerily calm despite the rapid beating of her heart. Cole's initial shock gave way to a sneer. "Should have made sure you were dead. Won't make that mistake twice." With surprising strength, he bucked upward, throwing Emily off balance. Her knife scored a line across his jaw as he twisted free, scrambling to his feet with the fluid motion of a born fighter. Blood trickled down his neck as he drew a wicked Bowie knife from his boot. "That cabin of yours," he taunted, circling her with the knife held low. "Burned real pretty. Shame you weren't inside it." Emily matched his movements, her grandfather's. Blade catching the dim light filtering through the stable's high windows. "Did Harland tell you why he wanted my land so badly?" Cole lunged suddenly, blade slashing toward her midsection. Emily sidestepped, countering with a slash that opened his sleeve but missed the flesh beneath. "Don't care," Cole grunted, recovering his balance. "Job's a job." "The spring," Emily said, feinting left before darting right, forcing Cole to pivot, awkwardly to keep her in view. "Purest water source in 3 counties. Controls that, and he controls every rancher for 50 miles. Understanding flickered across Cole's face, followed by bitter amusement. "So I nearly died for water rights?" He shook his head. "Harlan never mentioned that part." "Men like Harlan never tell the whole truth," Emily replied, her voice steady, despite the deadly dance they were engaged in. "Not even to their loyal dogs." Rage flashed in Cole's eyes at the insult. He charged forward with unexpected speed, catching Emily's knife arm and slamming her against a support post. Stars exploded behind her eyes as her head cracked against the wood. "Fancy words from a dead woman," Cole snarled, raising his knife. "In for a killing blow." Emily didn't try to match his strength. Instead, she went limp, dropping her body weight suddenly downward. The unexpected shift pulled Cole off balance, and Emily drove her knee upward into his solar plexus. Air rushed from Cole's lungs in a pained gasp. The momentary weakness was all she needed to break his grip and create space between them. Both fighters circled warily, reassessing each other. "Your father teach you that?" Cole wheezed, pressing a hand to his midsection. "My grandfather," Emily corrected. "White Eagle of the Comanche, my father's father." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Cole's features. The name White Eagle clearly meant something to him, perhaps tales told around campfires. Of the legendary chief's prowess in battle. "Lying won't save you," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "No lies," Emily replied, feeling the spirit of her ancestors flow through her veins like fire. "Only the truth. You left me for dead, not knowing my blood, my heritage. That was your final mistake." She advanced then, no longer defensive but moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. Cole retreated a step before steeling himself, knife held before him like a talisman against her inexorable approach. "Stay back," he warned, desperation leaking into his command. Emily said nothing, entering the space Matthew had taught her to find, the perfect calm at the center of the storm, where time itself seemed to slow. She could see every muscle twitch in Cole's face, every subtle tell that telegraphed his intentions. When he lunged, Emily was already moving. She flowed around his attack like water around stone, her grandfather's knife finding the vulnerable gap beneath his ribcage, the same place where Cole had stabbed her, leaving her for dead among the ashes of her home. Cole's eyes widened in shock and pain. His knife clattered to the dirt as his hands clutched reflexively at the wound. Emily stepped back, watching impassively as he sank to his knees. "You," he gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "How?" "I told you," Emily said, quietly. "You didn't know who I was, who my father was, what blood runs in my veins." Cole toppled to his side, his breathing shallow and rapid. Emily knelt beside him, not in compassion but to ensure he heard her final words. "I could let you die slowly, as you meant for me to die," she told him. "But unlike you, I was taught that even enemies deserve a clean death." With swift mercy she had learned from Matthew, Emily ended Cole's suffering with a precise strike. As the light faded from his eyes, she felt not triumph, but a solemn sense of completion. The circle was closed. Justice, not mere vengeance, had been served. Rising to her feet, Emily cleaned her blade on a handful of straw. Outside, she could hear shouts and the occasional gunshot as the struggle for Willow Creek's soul played out in the streets. Her father would need her help to finish what they had started. As she stepped from the dimness of the stable into the harsh light of day, Emily Blackwood stood tall, no longer just a homesteader fighting for her land, nor merely a marshal's daughter seeking justice. She had become something new, a warrior who carried the wisdom of two worlds within her, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily emerged from the stable into a transformed Willow Creek. What had begun as Harlan's show of force had evolved into something unprecedented. Ordinary citizens standing alongside James Blackwood and Judge Hayes, reclaiming their town one street at a time. Storekeepers who had paid protection money for years now wielded hunting rifles from rooftops. Women whose husbands had been driven off their land or intimidated into silence passed ammunition and tended to the wounded. Even Sheriff Taylor's deputies, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had abandoned their corrupt leader to stand with the townspeople. Emily spotted her father directing operations from the steps of the marshal's office. His left arm was now properly bandaged, but he showed no sign of slowing as he organized the volunteers into an effective fighting force. "Southeast corner secured," a dust-covered rancher was reporting as Emily approached. "Harlan's holed up in the bank with about 5 men. Got Taylor with him as a hostage." James nodded grimly. "Keep them contained. No heroics. We want casualties." "I kept to a minimum." He caught sight of Emily, relief washing over his stern features. "Cole?" "Won't trouble anyone again," she replied simply. Her father studied her face for a moment, seeming to recognize something in her expression that went beyond words. He nodded once in acknowledgement, not just of Cole's fate, but of the transformation Emily had undergone to bring it about. "Harlan's making his last stand at the bank," he informed her, gesturing toward the imposing stone building at the end of the main street. "Using Taylor as a shield." "Ironic," Emily observed. "The sheriff is finally serving some purpose for the townspeople." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. "Matthew's on the roof of the hotel with a clear line of sight to the bank's rear. Exit Judge Hayes is rallying more citizens from the surrounding farms. It's only a matter of time. Unless Harland gets desperate, Emily cautioned. Men like him don't surrender when cornered. They lash out. As if summoned by her words, the bank's double doors swung open. Sheriff Taylor stumbled out, hands bound before him, Harland's revolver pressed to his temple. Behind them followed Harland's remaining loyal gunmen, weapons at the ready. Blackwood! Harland shouted, his once immaculate attire now disheveled, his face flushed with rage and fear. Call off your mob, or the sheriff dies. James stepped forward, hands carefully visible at his sides. It's over, Victor. Your empire's finished. Cole's dead. Your hired guns are surrendering all over town. There's no way out. Harland's laugh held a manic edge. There's always a way out for men like me, Marshal. Money opens doors that bullets can't, even prison doors. Not this time, James replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. Judge Hayes contacted the territorial governor this morning. Federal troops are riding from Fort Stockton as we speak. No local judge you've bought will hear your case. You're facing a federal tribunal. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Harland's aristocratic features. You're bluffing. Am I? James nodded toward the roof of the general store, where Judge Hayes now stood alongside Matthew, a telegram in his hand. The wire came. Through an hour ago. It's over, Victor. Harland's composure cracked further. I still have this pathetic excuse for a lawman, he snarled, pressing his revolver harder against Taylor's head. The sheriff whimpered, his earlier arrogance replaced by naked terror. And what then? Emily spoke up, stepping forward to stand beside her father. You kill him, then what? You think that gets you past all of us? Past federal troops? There's nowhere to run, Harland. Harland's gaze locked onto Emily, recognition and hatred burning in his eyes. You, he spat, this is your doing. A nobody, a half-breed girl from a worthless patch of dirt. That worthless patch of dirt sits atop the purest spring in 3 counties, Emily replied calmly. The reason you were willing to burn people out, forge documents, commit murder, all for control of water rights. She held up the ledger she had taken from the marshal's safe. All documented here in your own hand. Every crime, every victim, every dollar, Harland's expression contorted with rage. You think you've won. You think any of this matters. Men like me built this territory. We tamed the wilderness while savages and peasants cowered in fear. No, Judge Hayes called down from his position. Men and women like the Blackwoods built this territory. People who worked the land, respected it, understood it, not men who sought to own everything and everyone. Harland's remaining gunmen exchanged glances, the inevitability of their situation becoming clear. One by one, they lowered their weapons, stepping away from their employer. Cowards! Harland screamed, his control unraveling completely. Gutless dogs! In his fury, his grip on Taylor loosened momentarily. The sheriff, seizing perhaps his only chance at redemption, drove his elbow back into Harland's stomach. As Harland doubled over, Taylor broke free, diving for cover behind a water trough. Harland recovered instantly, raising his revolver toward James and Emily. If I'm finished, so are you. 3 shots rang out in such rapid succession, they sounded almost as one. Harland staggered backward, his own shot going wild as bullets from James's revolver, Emily's borrowed gun, and Matthew's rifle found their mark. The cattle baron collapsed to his knees, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Blood blossomed across his fine brocade vest, the same crimson shade as the paint that had once marked the entrance to Emily's cabin. You don't understand, he gasped, his voice suddenly small and confused. I was bringing progress, civilization. This is civilization, James replied quietly, holstering his weapon. People standing together against tyranny, justice prevailing over power. Harland tried to speak again, but only blood bubbled from his lips. He toppled forward onto the dusty street, the empire he had built through intimidation and violence, collapsing with him. For a long moment, silence held the town in its grip. Then, like a dam breaking, sound rushed back. voices raised in relief, in triumph, in disbelief that the oppression they had lived under for so long had finally ended. Emily felt a strange emptiness as she watched townspeople congregate around. Harlan's body, the driving force that had sustained her through weeks of pain and training, the need for justice, had been fulfilled. In its place, a question. What now? James seemed to sense her thoughts, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Emily. You did what needed doing." She looked up at him, this man who had walked between two worlds his entire life, never fully belonging to either, yet drawing strength from both. "What happens next?" "Rebuilding," he answered simply. "For the town, for the territory, for you." They made their way to the marshal's office, where Wilson and Matthew were already waiting. The old cavalry officer sported fresh bandages, but stood straighter now, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Never thought I'd live to see Harlan fall," he admitted as they entered. "Figured he'd outlast us all." "Evil men often seem immortal until someone finds the courage to stand against them," Matthew observed, his dark eyes finding Emily's. The granddaughter of White Eagle found that courage. Emily felt a flush of embarrassment at the praise. "I had help. All of you supported you," James interrupted gently. "But this began with your stand, daughter. Never forget that. Judge." Hayes entered, followed by several of the town's elders, merchants and ranchers who had suffered under Harlan's regime, but had been too afraid to act individually. "Marshal Blackwood," the feed store owner began awkwardly, "we've talked it over and, well, we owe you and your daughter an apology. We should have stood up to Harlan years ago." "Fear is a powerful weapon," James replied without judgment. "Harlan wielded it expertly. What matters is that when the moment came, you found your courage. The question now," Judge Hayes said, unfolding a map of the territory across the marshal's desk, "is how to make things right. Harlan stole land from dozens of families. Some are gone, some dead. The water rights alone will take months to sort out properly." Emily studied the map, her gaze finding the spot where her cabin had stood. "My home is gone, but the land remains. The spring that Harlan coveted so badly should benefit everyone, not just whoever owns that parcel." A murmur of surprise ran through the assembled townsfolk. James regarded his daughter with undisguised pride. "What are you suggesting?" Hayes asked. "A trust," Emily said, the idea forming as she spoke. "The water rights held in common for all. Legitimate ranchers and farmers in the area. Fair access based on need, not power." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "It could work. Would need proper legal framework, administration." "I'll oversee it," Wilson volunteered. "Been meaning to find a purpose since my arthritis made ranching too difficult." As the discussion continued, plans taking shape for a more equitable distribution of the resources Harlan had sought to monopolize, Emily found herself stepping back, watching rather than participating. A weariness born of weeks of tension and training settled into her bones. Matthew appeared at her side, his presence calming as always. "Your path has reached a crossroads, niece," he observed quietly. "The warrior's journey does not end with a single battle." Emily met his gaze. What comes after vengeance, after justice, growth, healing, purpose? The medicine man gestured toward her father, now deep in discussion with Hayes and the others. "James found his purpose in upholding the white man's law, while honoring the spirit of his Comanche heritage. Your purpose may be different, but no less worthy." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Emily moved to the window to see riders approaching, uniformed cavalry from Fort Stockton, as her father had promised. The federal presence would ensure that Harlan's remaining supporters could not reassert control. "It really is over," she murmured, watching as the soldiers dismounted in the street. "This chapter, yes," Matthew agreed, "but your story continues." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Federal investigators descended on Willow Creek, collecting evidence of Harlan's crimes and interviewing witnesses long silenced by fear. Land deeds were examined, forgeries identified, legitimate claims restored where possible. Emily spent hours with the investigators, her testimony crucial to building a case against Harlan's network that extended far beyond the immediate territory. The cattle baron might be dead, but his financial backers in Austin and beyond remained to be brought to justice. On the fifth day, as sunset painted the western sky in shades of orange and purple, Emily found herself standing amid the ruins of her cabin. She had ridden out alone, needing space to think, to decide what came next. Little remained of the home she had built with her own hands: charred timbers, broken crockery, the twisted metal frame of her bed, all scattered by wind and weather. Since the night Cole and his men had left her for dead, yet amid the destruction Emily found unexpected signs of renewal. Wildflowers had taken root among the ashes, their delicate blooms pushing up through the blackened soil. Nature itself was showing her the way forward, not erasing what had happened, but transforming it into something new. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. James approached on his stallion, leading Penny, Emily's mare that had fled during the attack and had somehow found her way back to town during the confrontation with Harlan. "Thought you might want to see her," James said, as he dismounted. "Wilson's been looking after her. She's skittish but remembers you." Emily approached the mare slowly, murmuring soothing words in the Comanche tongue. Penny's ears flicked forward in recognition, and she stretched her neck to nuzzle Emily's palm. "She survived. Just as you did," James observed, surveying the ruins of the cabin. "Are you planning to rebuild here?" Emily considered the question as she stroked Penny's velvet nose. "I don't know," she admitted. "This place holds memories now. Not all of them good." "Understandable." James moved to stand beside her, his gaze taking in the devastation Cole had wrought. "I've received orders from the Territorial Marshal's office. They want me to establish a permanent presence in Willow Creek. Too much corruption to be rooted. Out with just a temporary assignment." Emily glanced at him in surprise. "You're staying?" He nodded. "The town needs stability during the transition. Judge Hayes is setting up a proper court, independent of Harlan's influence. Wilson's organizing the water trust you proposed." A slight smile touched his lips. "Seems I'll be busy for the foreseeable future." "They're lucky to have you," Emily said sincerely. "I could use help," James continued, his tone carefully casual. "Someone who knows the territory, understands both sides of its nature. The Marshal's office has authorized me to appoint a deputy." Emily stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Me? A deputy marshal? Why not?" James shrugged. "You've proven your courage, your resourcefulness, your commitment to justice. The badge doesn't care if you're a woman or who your ancestors were. It only cares that you uphold what it represents." Emily faltered, overwhelmed by the unexpected offer. "I've never thought of myself as a lawwoman." "Neither did I once," James replied. "I was simply White Eagle's son, learning the warrior's path. But I found that justice transcends the boundaries between our worlds." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small silver star. "You don't have to decide now. Take time to consider." Emily looked from the badge to the ruins of her former life, then to the wildflowers pushing through the ashes. Perhaps this was the purpose Matthew had spoken of, not just seeking justice for herself, but helping others find it as well. "What about Matthew?" she asked. "He can't return to his canyon now that so many know of its existence." "Already settled," James assured her. "Hayes has deeded him land at the base of Broken Rock, legally documented this time. He'll establish a proper home there, continue his healing work for those who seek it." As the last light faded from the sky, father and daughter stood together amid the ruins that had catalyzed their reunion. Neither fully white nor fully Comanche, they occupied the challenging space between worlds, but instead of weakness, Emily now recognized that duality as a unique strength. "We should head back before dark," James finally said, turning toward his horse. Emily lingered a moment longer, her hand finding the medicine pouch at her belt, the one Matthew had given her weeks ago in the canyon. Within it lay a small leather-wrapped object she had carried since that night, but had never opened. Untying the soft buckskin, she revealed a tiny carved thunderbird, a protective symbol among the Comanche, meant to watch over warriors on dangerous journeys. It had belonged to her grandfather, then her father, and now to her. "Ready?" James called, already mounted. Emily wrapped the carving carefully and returned it to her pouch. Tomorrow would bring decisions about rebuilding, about the deputy's badge, about which path to follow. But tonight she would celebrate what had already been accomplished: justice served, a community freed, and a heritage embraced in all its complexity. "Ready?" she confirmed, mounting Penny with the fluid grace Matthew had taught her. Together, they rode toward Willow Creek, leaving the ashes of the past behind while carrying its lessons forward. As they crested the final hill, the town's lights spread out before them like earthbound stars. Emily reined Penny to a stop, taking in the sight. This place that had been dominated by one man's greed now hummed with possibility, with hope, with the promise of a more just future. "What are you thinking?" James asked, noting her expression in the moonlight. Emily smiled, a true smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. That some fires aren't meant to destroy. Some are meant to forge something stronger than what existed before. Her father nodded in understanding, the wisdom of two cultures reflected in his gaze. The Comanche believe that from the hottest fires come the finest steel. Together, they rode down toward the waiting town, a marshal and his daughter, shaped by tragedy but not defined by it, carrying within them the unquenchable flames of justice and the enduring strength of their dual heritage. Behind them, a solitary wolf howled from a distant ridge, not in mourning, but in triumph. 3 months after Harlan's fall, Willow Creek had transformed. The town that once cowered under a cattle baron's shadow now bustled with renewed purpose. Storefronts that had stood empty were reopened by returning families. The marshal's office, now permanently established under James Blackwood's authority, maintained the peace with firm but fair governance. On the outskirts, construction crews worked steadily on a new community building, the headquarters for the Willow Creek Water Trust. The innovative arrangement Emily had proposed had gained territorial approval, becoming a model that neighboring counties sought to emulate. Emily surveyed the progress from horseback, satisfaction warming her despite the autumn chill. Penny shifted beneath her, eager to continue their morning patrol. The silver deputy's badge pinned to Emily's riding coat caught the sunlight as she turned the mare toward the southern boundary of the county. She had accepted her father's offer after 2 weeks of consideration. The position suited her in ways she hadn't anticipated, allowing her to bridge communities much as her father had done throughout his career. Settlers who might dismiss a federal marshal found they could speak openly with her. Native communities that had traditionally avoided white authority recognized the Comanche influences in her bearing and methods. "Deputy Blackwood," Emily reined, Penny around to see young Tommy Peterson racing toward her on his pinto pony. At 15, he served as a messenger between the marshal's office and outlying ranches, eager to follow in Emily's footsteps. "Telegram from Fort Worth," he called, waving a yellow envelope. "Marshal says it's important." Emily took the telegram, scanning its contents quickly. A smile spread across her features as she tucked it into her coat pocket. "Tell my father I'll be back by sundown," she instructed Tommy. "I'm heading out to Broken Rock first." The boy nodded eagerly. "To see Mr. Running Elk. Ma says he fixed her rheumatism with some kind of special tea." "Your mother's right," Emily confirmed. "Matthew has helped many people since establishing his new home. After the boy departed, Emily urged Penny into a comfortable lope toward the western hills. Matthew's new residence sat at the base of Broken Rock Canyon, a proper cabin supplemented by a traditional teepee where he conducted his healing work. The territorial governor himself had ensured the medicine man received formal title to the land in recognition of his role in exposing Harlan's crimes. She found Matthew gathering herbs in the meadow adjacent to his home. Though the calendar marked him as an old man, he moved with the fluid grace of someone half his age, selecting plants with practiced precision. "The spirits told me you would visit today." He greeted her without looking up. "Good news travels on favorable winds." Emily dismounted, no longer surprised by Matthew's uncanny perceptions. "The federal court in Austin has ruled," she confirmed. "All of Harlan's illegally acquired properties are to be returned to their rightful owners where possible, or allocated to the Territorial Land Trust, where the original owners cannot be located." Matthew nodded, adding a sprig of sage to his basket. "Justice moves slowly in the white man's world, but it moves." "There's more," Emily continued, excitement coloring her voice. "Remember those ledgers we found? They contained evidence against Harlan's financial backers in Austin and San Antonio. The territorial governor has ordered an investigation into 3 members of the state legislature." "The rot ran deep," Matthew observed. "Cutting out all the disease parts will take time." They walked together toward his cabin, where a pot of fragrant tea already waited, Matthew having anticipated her arrival with his usual foresight. "And your new path?" he asked as they settled on the porch. "Does it satisfy the warrior spirit that awoke within you?" Emily considered the question thoughtfully. The initial drive for vengeance that had fueled her recovery had transformed into something more sustaining, a commitment to ensuring others wouldn't suffer as she had. "It feels right," she answered finally. "Using what I learned from you, from my father, from both sides of my heritage, to protect those who need protection." Matthew's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "White Eagle would be proud. A true warrior finds purpose beyond battle." They spoke for another hour, Matthew sharing news from Comanche communities to the west, while Emily updated him on developments in Willow Creek. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a wagon, Judge Hayes, making his weekly visit to consult with Matthew on integrating traditional medicines into the town's new infirmary. Emily took her leave, promising to return soon. The afternoon sun was beginning its westward descent as she guided Penny toward her final destination before returning to town, the site of her former home. Where charred ruins had once stood, a new structure now took shape. Smaller than her original cabin, but sturdier, with stone foundations and a broad porch facing the sunrise. Emily had decided to rebuild, not to live there permanently, but as a sanctuary where she could reconnect with the memory of her mother and the independence she had valued. Wilson supervised the construction, finding renewed purpose in the project. He stood now on the partially completed porch, calling instructions to 2 young ranchers who were setting roof beams. "Right on schedule," he informed Emily as she approached. "Should be watertight before the first snow. That spring house you wanted is finished too. Finest stonework I've seen in the territory." The spring that had motivated Harlan's deadly greed now flowed through a carefully constructed channel, serving Emily's modest needs while directing the majority of its pure water toward a community irrigation system that would benefit a dozen surrounding farms. "It's perfect, Samuel," she said, using the old cavalryman's given name, a privilege he extended to few. "My mother would have approved." Wilson's weathered face softened. "Sarah was always practical that way. I strongly believe that blessings should be shared." He hesitated, then added, "Your father rode out this morning toward the North Woods, said something about paying respects." Emily understood immediately. Though rarely discussed, she knew that deep in the forest lay a sacred site where her grandfather White Eagle had been laid to rest according to Comanche tradition when James was still a young man. "I'll meet him in town," she decided. Some journeys were meant to be taken alone. As sunset painted the hills in amber and gold, Emily completed her circuit back to Willow Creek. The town glowed with lantern light as businesses closed and families gathered for evening meals. So different from the tense, fearful community it had been under Harlan's shadow. At the marshal's office, she found her father reviewing correspondence at his desk. The past months had added new silver streaks to his black hair, but his posture remained unbent, his blue eyes sharp as ever. "Court ruled in our favor," she announced, hanging her hat on the rack. James nodded. "Got the wire? Good news, though we still have work ahead." He gestured toward a stack of papers. "These are claims from families as far as the New Mexico border, all with stories about Harlan's men driving them off their land. Going to take months to sort through them all." "We'll manage," Emily assured him, pouring coffee for them both. "One case at a time, one family at a time." Her father studied her over the rim of his cup. "Any regrets about accepting the badge instead of returning to ranching?" Emily considered the question, thinking of all that had transpired since that fateful day when Cole and his men had left her for dead. The pain, the transformation, the discovery of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "No regrets," she answered. "Honestly, this is where I'm meant to be." James smiled, a rare, full smile that erased years from his features. "I knew it the moment I saw you standing in that alley, war paint on your face, fighting for justice rather than just revenge. You found the balance I've sought my whole life." "I had a good teacher," Emily replied. "Two of them, actually." Outside, twilight deepened into true night, stars appearing in constellations that had guided Comanche warriors for centuries. Within the marshal's office, father and daughter continued their work side by side, each enhanced by the dual heritage that flowed in their veins. The flames that had nearly claimed Emily's life had instead forged something remarkable. A woman who moved confidently between worlds, who carried the strength of her ancestors into a future they could never have imagined, not just surviving, but thriving. Not just seeking justice, but embodying it. In the stable behind the office, Penny nickered softly to James's stallion. From distant hills came the howl of a lone wolf, a sound that once might have seemed mournful, but now registered in Emily's ears as a song of triumph and belonging. The outlaws who had burned her cabin and left her for dead hadn't just underestimated who her father was. They had fatally misjudged who she would become. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.